The idea is, though, psychologists have invented this word, this term, pluralistic ignorance, to describe what happens when what you see in terms of other people's external behaviors is out of line with what they feel privately. In this case, each person privately feels, smoke, weird, should do something about it. But publicly, they're all just kind of like, not doing much of anything. So what they each show each other is nothing, even though they're each privately harboring these fears. And so change doesn't happen. So the pessimistic part is this part here. Duh, right? The optimistic part, though, is in the whole idea that pluralistic ignorance is kind of like a bubble. It's very easy to burst it because it relies on consensually held ignorance, basically, right? Everybody not knowing what each other is privately thinking. If people start saying what they're privately thinking, like one person says, hey, I wonder if the building's on fire, then all of a sudden everybody can be like, yeah, we should check that out, right? But it requires that first person to break the seeming unanimity of the group. Another classic study. Before I get to that, this isn't a classic study at all. This is something that I heard quite a bit as a kid, which is my father saying, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you? In fact, of course, you're supposed to say no, Dad. I wouldn't be that stupid. But of course, that's not really the truth usually. But in any case, this is supposed to be a rhetorical question. But it's getting at the idea that social norms are actually very powerful, right, in society. I think of dandelions when I think of social norms, because, I don't know, they've never really done me any harm, as far as I can tell. I've never had them sneak into my brain while I was sleeping and, take me over or something like that. I kind of like them. But of course, we poison them and spend countless hours pulling them out of our lawns because we have decided collectively that they are an evil weed, right? And therefore they must die. Even though they haven't really done anything to us individually. There's all kinds of other ways that you could see a dandelion, right? You could see them as food, alcohol, something that little kids can enjoy the simple beauty of, something that other little kids can make headbands out of, I guess, and enjoy the simple beauty of. You can think of dandelions as just something that is beautiful. But it depends. It depends how they have been collectively defined. If they have been defined as evil weed, then you will wage war on them. If they have been defined as something potentially beautiful, then you might have a whole different relationship to them. When you're walking down the street and you stub your toe and you go like this, and you instantly feel like a complete loser, right? And you look around to see if anybody noticed. Like, it's almost like you feel like you've fallen into a hole in the middle of the street or something like that, right? You look around to see if anyone has noticed. Power of social norms, right? If you were in the middle of the wilderness, here you are hiking across the Sahara all by yourself, and you go, whoops. What are you going to do? You're going to be like, oh, wait. Right? No, you're not going to care. You're walking across the Sahara. Who cares? Right? Power of social norms. When you fall off your bike, same idea. When you're this person, you either know that everyone's going to laugh at you and you're going to feel like a big humiliated loser the next day, or you're going to know that everyone's going to laugh with you and you're going to feel like Mr. Cool Guy. But in either case, power of social norms, right, is driving how you feel in this situation. Or you can think about how people dress. Power of social norms. I love this one. Because each one of these guys is such a rugged individualist. This is a, subgroup, right? This is a group that basically creates its identity in contrast with the mainstream identity by differentiating itself from the mainstream. But the only way that this identity really gets has any coherence to it and is able to sustain itself is because it's internally validated by other members of the group. You see social norms both in the differentiation from the mainstream and the need for that integration within subgroups in order to maintain that differentiation, right? You see social norms that work there as well. And need I say more? Social norms. So that if you look up at the sky while you're walking down the street, right, and you just sort of look up at the sky all by yourself, most people are going to think you're weird. And it's not going to have much of an effect on anything. In fact, according to Stanley Milgram, about 4% of people will also sort of,
Yeah.
you know, and then keep walking and think like, okay, buddy, whatever, right? But if you and a small group of people stop and look up at the sky, then again, according to Stanley Milgram, you can get a crowd of people around you. In some cases, in his experiments in New York, they were big enough to stop traffic because it was just a small group. There's something about that. It's very difficult for a person to act alone and to go against a group, but it's very easy for people to act with other people because the social norms that's created by the subgroup has enough internal sort of resilience, if you will, that it can withstand the differentiation from the main group. Social norms you see all over the place, and all sorts of different behaviors that they've been shown to have an effect. And all sorts of different, you know, regular everyday behaviors as well as environmental behaviors. Social norms are really quite powerful. And they're something that we underappreciate as individuals. When you ask people why they did whatever, what you typically don't get is the answer, because everybody else was doing it. But people tend to have a fairly poor ability to perceive the influence of social norms on their own behaviors. But they are powerful to our own behavior. Another classic study, and I'll stop telling you about classic psychology studies. This is the Solomon Asch study back in the 1950s. We just asked people, all right, which of these lines is the same length as that line over there? Right? And if you do it in everyday testing situations, like one person at a time all by themselves, then everybody, of course, says B, right? Because it's really obvious. No, it's C, right? It's really obvious. And so he set this up to be a situation that was totally unambiguous. Everybody knows what the right answer is. Okay? But what he wanted to do is put people in a situation where, so let's say it's the front row here, right? He gets people to say, all right, so so they're in a group, sitting around a table or whatever, and the first person says, it's line B. Line B, line B. Then you get to this poor individual over here, who is the real subject in the experiment, right? Who feels kind of like this guy. Who's like, you know, still looks like line C to me. I don't know, man, right? What they wanted to see, though, is how frequently would these people conform, and it turns out that 3/4 of us will conform. Not all the time, but out of like a dozen different trials when they were given the opportunity to, about 3/4 of us will conform at least once. We will say something that we absolutely know to be not true, just because we don't want to look like a big loser. Even in a group that has no real power over us, they don't control our income, they can't pull a trigger, right? They can't vote us off the island, they're not our friends, we're never going to see them again, it's just a bunch of strangers, and yet conformity has this much power. But what this also showed is that social norms are, again, also not something that operates in some sort of macro-cultural scale. I mean, there might be some norms that operate at that level, but social norms are constructed in micro-situation after micro-situation. How many people does it take to establish a social norm? In the Solomon Asch study, it takes about 3. Right? Once you've got about, and this is a slightly different measurement, but it doesn't really matter. Once you've got about 3 people in your group, you have maxed out your conformity pressure. So it doesn't even matter if you get up to like 15, 16 people. The conformity pressure doesn't increase after that. So what this means is that every day, in situation after situation, right? At work, at school, hanging with your friends, whatever, social norms are operated that are constructed sort of in the moment, on the spot, by those people that are there. And those social norms will tend to dictate the behavior of most of the people. So what tends to be seen as appropriate? What kind of conversations can people bring up? What do people tend to spend their time thinking about? What do you plan to do on the weekend, etc. is largely driven by a very small number of people in situation after situation. And at that level, people have a great deal of power. Right? Because it's not that hard to go against just a few people if you're willing to take that first step. And when someone does, it breaks this conformity pressure substantially. So the classic research suggests. If one person speaks up, conformity rates go down to about 6%. And what's